Welcome to The Outlet, an NBA podcast hosted by Nick Fay and Kory Waldron.
On this episode of The Outlet, Kory and I are joined by Jac Manuell to continue our top 25 unrestricted free agents. As always, you can catch The Outlet on all streaming platforms. Enjoy the show. But moving on to number 15, we got Marcus Morris, who we already talked about a little bit earlier in the show. Obviously, he kind of popped off with the Knicks. Clippers traded the first-round pick to get him. Plays somewhat well in the regular season, but in the postseason, he just didn't live up to the hype at all.
Yeah, for a guy that talks as much trash as he does, he needs to produce more. Simple as that. My view on Marcus Morris is tainted because of the personality. So I try to be as objective as possible. But if you get the Knicks Marcus Morris on the Clippers next season, you look to retain him. If you get the postseason version of Marcus Morris, then you'd let him walk.
Sorry to cut you off, Jac. Do you think some of the reason he was so good in the Knicks is that there was no pressure and there was no one else getting the ball, and then all of a sudden he went to the Clippers and now he's like third or fourth fiddle and he's not getting the same amount of touches and the pressure situation is amplified?
Yes, I think there are a lot of players that are decent role players that produce at a high quality level, then get the bag then get the pressure, then get the spotlight. It's just like, oh, okay, this is a bit different. I'm not used to this situation. How do I deal with it? And obviously, a lot of Los Angeles Clippers were guilty of doing that when the lights were brightest on them in the postseason. But it's a fascinating one because we know what Marcus Morris can be. He's almost like, we've talked about sort of the prototypical sort of fourth guy, fifth guy in your sort of lineup. Good defender, good three-point shooter, can hijack the offense though. He wants his touches. He wants to be a semi guy. He did it in Boston. He obviously did it in New York because no one else could hit a shot there. He did it a little bit for the Clippers as well. When you have Paul George, whatever you want to say about Paul George, when you have Kawhi Leonard, even Lou Williams, who is probably their third best offensive player, at least in my eyes, you don't want to be taking shots away from them. You don't want to be hijacking the offense. So if Marcus Morris can have a proper mindset under Ty Lue, then yeah, and you get the buy-in. It's just like, look, I'm all in to do whatever it needs to get a championship for this team. Whereas if he wants his touches, he wants his money, then look elsewhere. I think that he still has immense value given the position that he plays and what he can produce on both ends of the floor. I'll be intrigued to see what his priorities are heading into the free agency period.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the best 3-and-D player, arguably in this free agency class. But again, the personality and the attitude is the negative, and the inconsistency in the jump shot. Again, good three-point shooter for the duration of his career, but there was a clear-cut dip when he got to the Clippers, right? Shot 43% from three with the Knicks, then only just 31% with the Clippers. Obviously, it was only in 19 games, and in the playoffs, we saw that disaster continue. And also, we know also there wasn't any chemistry with the Clippers, so that could also be an issue for why Marcus Morris wasn't quite himself. But like you mentioned, Jac, he's a guy who tends to hijack the offense slightly because he does want his touches, but he's a very good defender, a physical defender. He can guard, 2 through 4. He can provide some offense, provides decent rebounding. It just depends on if there's going to be more headache than there is going to be positive with Marcus Morris. And at this point, that's the biggest question mark coming off of his antics against Paul Millsap, which completely flipped that
Luka.
Series in my eyes. Time
God,
to
that
tell
Luka
where
stuff.
Marcus Morris goes.
Yeah, I think you look at the
stuff.
annex, like you were alluding to, Jac, and just like stepping on the ankle and all that stuff and hitting him in the head. It's just like, do you want that on your team? Obviously, you want to have that toughness and you want to have maybe an enforcer type, but he kind of pushes that to the edge a little bit. And I think with Marcus Morris, the thing with him is he's super streaky. Like that's just how he's been his entire career. It was the same thing with Boston. He'd have a playoff game where he'd give them 23 points, and the next game he might give you 5. So he's like a guy that you can't necessarily depend on. You don't want your offense to be like dependent on Marcus Morris. You want him to be your fifth option or a guy that comes off the bench. Defensively, he's great because he gives you that versatility, but offensively, you never really know what you're getting. And like you guys mentioned, he can hunt for his shots, and it gets to a point too where if he feels disrespected almost, he's going to take more shots. Like there was points in that Clippers-Mavs series, I have Luka on me, I need to get an ISO against Luka, where it's like, yeah, you're at an advantage, but you, like Jac mentioned, you still have Paul George, you still have Kawhi, you still have Lou Williams on this team, so why are you trying to take this possession for yourself and shoot 5 seconds into the shot clock, or just doing some mid-range fadeaway, which isn't an efficient shot unless you're a superstar. So Marcus Morris will be interesting. Part of me feels like he'll stay with the Clippers because I'm not sure anyone else is going to offer him a contract that he likes.
Yeah, because the teams that have space and have money aren't going to give him the money that he wants because they don't need him. He doesn't fit their wants and needs roster wise and going forward. So, is he going to be on Charlotte? Is he going to go back to New York? Is he going to be on Atlanta? Probably not.
He could cash out.
He could. It'll be
or do the
interesting
whole
to sort of
same
see.
thing as the Knicks situation, sign the 1 year deal and the idea that you're going to get traded at the deadline. You know what I mean?
It would not surprise me. He's bounced around a little bit. It'll be interesting to sort of see where he does land. If he takes the mindset maybe a little bit more of his brother, as sort of being like, all right, I get it. I can be tough. I can be physical, but I also I'm just going to be a role guy. I'm going to hit my 3-pointers and I'm going to try and play some physical defense. Then then we might see a Marcus Morris that has a chip in 2021, but only time will tell.
Yeah, if he were to accept kind of the Markieff role, that would be ideal for him because that would take away a lot of the weaknesses we just mentioned. He'll just be focusing on that 3-point shot. But moving on to somebody who can shoot a lot of threes at a high rate, Jac's boy, Joe Harris at number 14. Surprised, Kory, he allowed us to put Joe Harris not in the top 10. So, Jac, let's you kick this off.
Should have been number one.
In your heart.
In my number one in my heart, number one in my OnlyFans subscriber list. There's no doubt about that.
I wonder, if Joe Harris ever heard you talking about him, what he would think.
He'd probably get a restraining order. Let's put it that way. But in saying that, Joe Harris obviously is him and Davis Bertans are the sharpshooters on the market, and in a league that has become incredibly space oriented and 3-point reliant, you can do. These are the two of the three best 3-point shooters. It's Duncan Robinson. In terms of role players, obviously Steph and Clay are in a league of their own. But you got Duncan Robinson, you got Joe Harris, you got Davis Bertans. Those are probably the three best 3-point shooters in the league that come to mind when I think of 3-point shooting. Joe Harris obviously is more than likely going to stay with Brooklyn. Joe Tsai has said that they aim to retain him. People are sort of reading into social media images. Oh, look, we got Joe Harris with the new jersey on. That means he's going to stay. Sean Marks must have let the social media team do it. All right, let's chill out a little bit. Social media teams don't necessarily have the behind-the-scenes knowledge of what Sean Marks is doing with contract deals. But I think Joe has said that he wants to stay. He said that it's going to sort itself out. He revitalized himself in Brooklyn. The reason that he is going to get a hefty pay deal is going to be because of the Brooklyn Nets. They offered him a nice little cheeky deal for $216 previously, which some people said was inflated. Those people are obviously incredibly stupid. But now he's going to get a really nice pay deal, probably the best of his career, and probably and it's going to be well deserved. A guy that in the bubble was the third best Brooklyn Nets player, was doing it in disgusting efficiency. It was unheard of, despite the fact that the defenses were honed in on him, and he looks even better with a headband than Kory Waldron.
I mean, Joe Harris is great. I mean, when you need offense, Joe Harris is a guy you want on your team. He can provide 3-point shooting and underrated at getting to the basket. He shot 65% within 3 feet from the hoop. I had to drop that stat for you two Broken Net boys. So really good around the rim. Obviously can hit the 3-point shot. If anyone needs shooting, Joe Harris is going to be a guy they call. I don't think the Brooklyn Nets are going to let him get away. But again, another team may offer them more money, and the Brooklyn Nets might not want to go out of their way to pay him. But I think the Brooklyn Nets would be foolish to lose one of their best shooters when you have Kyrie and Kevin Durant coming back, because that's the kind of offensive threat you want alongside of Durant and Irving.
Joe Harris is just the perfect complementary offensive role player.
No, you don't need to say complimentary role player. You can just say perfect. He's perfect. Full stop.
Whatever, Jac. But just the ability that he doesn't necessarily need to have the ball in his hands at such a high rate. It's just a few seconds for that 3-point shot, off-ball movement, providing the gravity. And then like Kory alluded to, his ability to drive to the rim. And Jac, we saw this in the bubble. He was able to hit some mid-range shots, add to his game a little bit more. So I think offensively, you can't really ask more from a role player. He's a really good player. He's established himself as not just being that 3-point guy. He's established himself as being a really good role player. Even the passing has taken strides. That's something I noticed in the bubble too. Jac and I have talked about it. And I think defensively, he's not necessarily someone where it's oh my God, we got Joe Harris out there. We need to hide him like we have to hide JJ Redick. He can hold his own. He's not going to lock down any all-stars or superstars. But if you put him on a KCP, he should be able to, defend him. So I think Joe Harris would be a perfect player on probably on any team in the NBA, but like we talked about, the Nets aren't going to let him go. They're willing to go over the luxury tax. He's such a perfect fit next to Kyrie, KD, and even Spencer and Karras and whoever else you have on that team. So think Joe would be a lock to be in Brooklyn, unless one of the young bad teams wants to offer him $20 million a year.
That could happen. We'll be chatting on the buzz about the fact that apparently the Milwaukee Bucks are interested for him for the mid-level exception. Yeah, right. He's going to play for a team that has Cream City jerseys. Please.
You're too much, Jack. But any final thoughts on Joe Harris?
How long you got?
Let's go. Let me ask you, Kory. Anything else, Kory?
Yeah, he's a stud.
He's a stud, and Jack will say in more than one way. But moving on to number 13, we got Mike Conley, who maybe had the biggest drop-off in the NBA from the 2019 season to the 2020 season. This is a guy that was a really good point guard, and we thought this would be enough to push Utah to that next level. Things just didn't really work out in year one. He does have a player option, which I think we all expect him to accept, but still, give me your thoughts on Conley.
It was a stark drop. Obviously he was the sort of third guy or second guy to sort of alleviate the burden on Donovan Mitchell in key crucial moments. Whether the injury history is starting to catch up to him, it certainly could be possible. I also just think that the chemistry on the court, and maybe off the court too, because we don't know what goes on behind the scenes and with Rudy Gobert and not getting his touches, and obviously Mike Conley as a lead ball handler he's played with a guy like Marc Gasol his whole career, and now he's playing with a guy like Rudy Gobert who have different offensive wants and needs, and we can clearly see that the on-court chemistry with those two wasn't there. But we did see post-baby Fred VanVleet style, a guy that we'll be talking about very high in this list. He produced when it did matter in certain occasions. So maybe he just needs to have a baby after the regular season, or maybe midway through the season, or around the sort of trade break. Who knows? But I'm not necessarily... we know that he's going to take a step back, but I don't think he is as bad as the start of the season, nor do I think he is as great as what he's produced in the high moments for Utah in the postseason against Denver either. So I think he's somewhere in the middle, and that's probably why we have him somewhere in the middle of this list.
Yeah, I mean, in the playoffs, he averaged 19 points per game, 5.2 assists, 1.6 steals on shooting splits of 48, 52, and 86. Whereas in the regular season,
shit really works.
Yeah, whereas in a regular season,
that baby shit really works apparently, my guy.
You all gotta have a kid for the bounce back. And then the regular season, 14 points per game, 4.5 rebound or assists, and shooting splits of 40, 37, and 82. Now the 37 from three isn't bad. That's an upgrade over last year and the year before. But the overall field goal percentage being down, not ideal. Again, that slow start he had was dreadful. I mean, there was games where he was like 1 of 9 consistently, unable to break double-digit points, and it looked like Mike Conley was, washed. Now, again, like Jack said, this is why he's in the middle of this list. I think Mike Conley can still be a very good, serviceable point guard, but he's more than likely your 4th or 5th option offensively and can provide some pick-and-roll playmaking, but he's not the same defender he was when he was in Memphis. He's not the same offensive threat that he was when he was in Memphis. This is just the back end of Mike Conley's career, and I do think the injuries to some degree have caught up to him. He's had some major injuries. A couple to his back. I think he's even had some knee injuries as well over the course of his career. His face, of course, he had a broken orbital bone as well, I believe. I think Mike Conley can still be a serviceable point guard. He can still be a important player to a contending team. But I think the expectations for Mike Conley going into this year were probably what hurt him the most, is because we expected him to be Memphis Grizzly prime Mike Conley alongside Donovan Mitchell, and that part of his career is just done.
And I think also the adjustment, like Jack kind of alluded to, of being the main ball handler, and then Donovan Mitchell now being the main ball handler in Utah. It might be easier next season because the roles will be a little bit more defined. You'll have, Donovan Mitchell, who's the pure star, and we saw that showcase in the postseason. Then you have Bogdanovich coming back as your second option, and then Gobert is kind of your third option because you're running so much pick and roll offense. Conley's able to kind of just pick his spots and allow him to kind of be himself, and I think he'll feel more comfortable. And I think he even alluded to, like, hey, I played my whole career in Memphis. Like, literally, I wasn't used to even the basic things of going into a different arena and stuff like that. So maybe he'll bounce back in year 2 in Utah, and it could really help them and maybe be enough to push them to the Western Conference Finals. We'll see. All right, guys, moving on from number 13 on to number 12, we got Andre Drummond. How are we feeling about Drummond at 12? I know Kory probably wanted him a little bit higher. Jack and I were like, but Kory, what are we thinking?
I mean, 12 is fair when all right, so let's focus in here. Andre Drummond has played for some terrible teams. And it is completely fair to also say maybe he's a little bit of a stat pattern. because he has been in circumstances that aren't great. Obviously, he's coming off the second half of his last season with the Cleveland Cavaliers, which are also not a very good team, and we actually did see a dip in all of his stats. Now, I think Andre Drummond is one of those players where if you put him in the correct situation, I think he can be really damn good. Now, he's led the league in offensive rebounds for 5 straight years. He's been the rebounding champion 4 or 5 times as well.
4 out of the last 5 years, yeah.
Right, 4 out of the last 5 years. So he is a top-notch rebounder, a guy who's averaged, over 16 rebounds per game one year, a double-double machine. The biggest issue with his game is the fact that he doesn't shoot threes, and obviously in the modern NBA, we know how important that is to have a three-point shot or some sort of jump shot in your game. Can't hit free throws, also pretty problematic in late-game situations. And defensively, his motor is in question. Now, this year did average decent, number metric-wise in terms of blocks per game and steals per game. But again, is that him in the to the Hassan Whiteside sense, block hunting, steal hunting, with it meaning very little to actually winning? It's a fair point, and that may be true. But I still think, giving Andre Drummond's body of work the last 5 years, given the fact he's just 26 or 27, you have to think that in the right situation, surrounded, let's say hypothetically, by shooters in Golden State, probably would be really damn good. Maybe even some rumors we heard about the Boston Celtics. That kind of system where he's surrounded by a lot of offensive weapons, and that's just to do the dirty work and rebound. I feel like he could also be good there. I think Drummond is a guy who has a very good skill set if he's surrounded by top talent. And the issue is, though, Andre Drummond is paid like he's top talent, and he's not a top 3 player on a championship team. He could probably be your 4th or 5th best, given the players ahead of being better. So that's where the issue comes into stand. And I know I'm a bigger Andre Drummond stan than most, probably, for some reason. I'm not really sure why. I like the numbers.
It's funny, though, it's because you hate the Pistons.
When I hate the Pistons, but he's off the Pistons, and I can love him all I want. I think Drummond is an interesting case because I again, we won't really know it. Again, right? Player option. If he opts into Cleveland, we're probably still going to think Drummond is just an empty numbered guy.
And he said he was going to.
Right, he's going to, because he can't turn down, $28 million or $27 million?
Yeah.
I just think Andre Drummond in a winning situation probably looks a lot better than he does.
There was also news coming out saying that negotiations for an extension or negotiation for a new contract with Cleveland were far apart with him and his agents and his team. And I'm like, what more do you want? You would be lucky to get $30 million over 3 years, Andre Drummond, let alone over a 1-season span. If he were to be on the open market right now as an unrestricted free agent, he'd be lucky to get that. To me, I think the comparison point that Kory made, to Hassan Whiteside, to make it to Boston, he's like an upgraded version of Enes Kanter. Not to disrespect Andre Drummond in a way, but he has a similar skill set. Really good offensively, great offensive rebounder. Enes Kanter maybe actually is a better offensive player in terms of just the moves he has in the low post. But Andre Drummond is a more complete player. I do like his passing. I think his passing is a little bit underrated. But to me, if he's not opting into this and his agent tells him otherwise, he needs to find a new agent, because that would be absolutely ludicrous if you're going to go, you know what? I think I could get more than $30 million on the open market, please.
Yeah, I think we're more eye to eye than I think we all think, because I think Andre Drummond is a good player, but like Kory said, he has to be your 4th best player. He has to buy into doing the dirty work. He has to.
Can he close? Can he close in an NBA Finals game?
I don't think that was one of the points I was going to bring up. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah, I was sorry from stealing your point, Nick. You can I guess I'll throw this at you you can touch on this one first. If hypothetically, like Kory mentioned, the Boston Celtics were to get him somehow in some sort of trade package or in some sort of whatever it might be, would he finish a game over Daniel Tice?
No, but that's fine, I think, right? Nick, go ahead. But I think that's okay. Go ahead, Nick.
I think it depends on the money amount. You know what I mean? If you're paying a guy like 10 to 15, you don't mind if he's not closing. But if you're paying him over $20 million, like, your ass better be on the floor. And like, I think the issue with Andre Drummond is like some of the skill set defensively, he showcased things, but it's not consistent. And there's also like a question with the switchability. And like Kory mentioned, the free throw shooting, it's improved a lot, but it's still only, I think, like 57%, which is still a scare where it's like, hey, we're just going to go to hack a Drummond, and that's going to kind of ruin our offense and ruin different things of the aspect. So I kind of agree, because let's just hypothetically say he was on Miami in the finals. Like, if Anthony Davis was on the floor, he would just cook him. Like, he would just take him out to the perimeter and make him, embarrass him. But I think
Joel Embiid loves him.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for Andre Drummond, I don't think Joel Embiid would have the confidence that he does in today's league.
But I think Drummond, and I saw this, I want to say it was from my guy Laz Jackson who mentioned this, Drummond will be more appreciated on his next contract because it'll be a lot less. You know what I mean? It'll be under 20. It'll probably be 15 million. You'll be like, yo, this guy Andre Drummond is mad good for what he's at that number in the position he plays. Part of that's on him, though, in buying into who he's going to be. We see these videos of him working on his handles, working on his three-point shot. It's like, no, Andre Drummond, you want to have a successful NBA career, focus on the things you're good at. Finishing inside, catching oops, rebounding, setting good screens, rolling to the rim, doing those small things, setting off-ball screens, just trying to do as much dirty work as you can, because that's where the center position is going. If you're not one of these elite guys or one of these versatile players, you have to make the most out of every opportunity you got. And I think that's what's concerning about Drummond, because he hasn't shown that in the past, but he still can progress because, like Kory mentioned, he's still really young.
Yeah. I think, right, if the contract is adjusted and he's making, less money than obviously $30 million, which is, is a little bit.
He's making half of that.
I got to pop another front.
Oh God, we got to put this on explicit. No.
I think, like, in the right situation, Drummond would play majority of the game, and then, like, if you're the Celtics, hypothetically, Daniel Tice is perfect for the late game situation because he can expand the floor a little bit more, give you some added spacing, and can do some of the better things in the late game situation than Drummond can. But I still think, like, through the course of majority of a basketball game, what Drummond can provide on the glass and somewhat defensively, because I think he would be more engaged in a better team. Like, let's put in perspective, too, the best year of his career might have been alongside Blake Griffin, who was only healthy for 1 year in Detroit.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, none of the fits have been well. Like, Detroit has never been great. Even Blake, it took him a little bit of time to expand his range and become, I think, what he averaged in, like, 2018-19, like, 5 threes a game or something along that. He hasn't necessarily played in a system that's been ideal for him, and he hasn't necessarily had great leadership on his team in terms of players. So maybe in the right situation, he kind of pop off. I feel like at the end of this contract, and if I was the Cavs, I wouldn't give him an extension, because I think that also makes it a little bit harder to trade him if it's a number that the opposing team doesn't want. So I'd be like, all right, play out your contract, go to free agency, and maybe he needs to be slightly humbled. Obviously, I don't know him personally, but I think if he goes into free agency, doesn't get a good contract that he likes, he signs a 1-year deal, and he realizes, like, hey, I need to change my game a little, that'd be good for him, because he still has plenty of time to, I don't want to say turn things around, because it's not like he's had a bad career, but he hasn't hit the potential that I think a lot of people anticipated with the way he played at such a young level.
Fair.
But any other thoughts on Drummond before we move on to number 11?
Let me just give a spicy take. If I'm looking for a center on current market, I would rather take the guy at 21, my Aussie brethren, Aaron Baines, over Andre Drummond. That's going to start a whole new podcast. Don't want to throw shade at Andre Drummond and get Kory all worked up and get him taking his goddamn shirt off, but that's where I will leave it.
I don't think that's like a completely hot take, just because of Baines has been more accepting of that role player role. You know what I mean? And he knows that he has to do those dirty work. And that's how his career really started. It wasn't like he was a high draft pick. So I think it's a fair take. But moving on to number 11, we got Evan Fournier. What do you guys think about him and his game?
I mean, I'm a fan of Evan Fournier's game in terms of just his ability to produce offensively at a high, efficient level on a consistent basis. He would add immense value to whether it's a meddling team like he currently is in Orlando, and just providing them a real offensive spark. As he's probably been one of their best offensive players with Nikola Vucevic, for the past, 3 seasons or so. If there were to be a better team that were to go after him, maybe a Lakers, just to come off the top of my head, I think that he would just he would look so much better in a lesser role. If you look at his efficiency already, and that just goes up even further. I like Evan Fournier, and I think that Bogdanovic, we'll talk about him, I guess, a little bit in the restricted series. But those two guys have similar sort of skill sets. I think Bogdan is a bit better of a playmaker and floor general. Evan Fournier is almost better as sort of an ancillary piece. I think Kory can sort of speak to a guy like Bojan Bogdanovic, who got a massive contract from Utah, which sort of led him out of Indiana. Will Fournier get that as a direct comparison point? I don't think so. But I do think that he does deserve some semblance of compensation for the efficiency that he has provided. He can be, we talk about, I guess, the important thing, makeshift sort of starters and are they going to be closing NBA finals games? Yeah, I think he can be a 4th or 5th starter. I certainly do believe that if you're looking at a lot of other teams. And he's not the best defensively, but he's not like, Andre Drummond. Ooh.
I mean, Fournier, so there's a lot to look at when it comes to a guy like Evan Fournier. So first off, he's been this efficient and this productive as an offensive player on a team that doesn't have a lot of offensive weapons. And I think that's the most impressive thing about Fournier is the fact that, he's averaging 18 points per game on shooting splits of 46, 39, and 81, where the second best offensive weapon on that team is, or maybe the best would be Vucevic, right? Yep. And then Fournier would probably be the second, and then third best is DJ Augustine, Aaron Gordon, like we're
yeah, right. Wow,
Terrence Ross off the bench, like we're really grasping for straws, looking at the other offensive weapons for this team. And when it comes to shot creators, he's definitely the best shot creator on this Orlando Magic team. So I think those are all promising things when you look at a guy like Fournier, who also is probably entering the prime of his career. 27, going to be 28, and as you kind of mentioned, Jack,
34, man. He does not look 27.
Yeah,
he's been in the league for a while too.
25. He lost all of his hair at 25.
Yep.
So I think like you mentioned, Jack. Probably not a top. He can't be your number 2 option, but on a championship team, he could probably be your 3rd or 4th best guy. And provide sort of like a matchup of LeBron James, for example, and Anthony Davis had Evan Fournier as their 3-point option in the playoffs. You probably feel even more confident about the Lakers going on a deep playoff run. And we know like the Portland Trailblazers have been a team that's had interest in Fournier in the past as well. Like, this is a guy who's had the attention of multiple teams throughout the last couple of years, especially at the trade deadline. And maybe this is a point in time where he looks at Orlando, yes, back-to-back playoff appearances, but back-to-back times getting bounced in 5 games in the first round. So maybe a guy like him's looking at saying, maybe if I get on a different situation, I can be a better offensive weapon, or maybe even just have more talent around me in which I don't even have to have as much attention. I can be even better. But he's definitely going to be a guy to keep an eye on because he is someone who can score and isn't a negative defensively. Obviously, we've seen him with the Magic, which is a good defensive team. You put him in another good system, he probably has similar success.
Yeah, I think a situation like the Lakers, like you guys brought up, it'd be fine because they can, I don't want to say hide him defensively, but there's guys to compensate for his lack of defensive ability. Like, he's not going to lock down anybody. He's not going to be a great defender. He's going to put in effort as long as you have somebody behind him and he can play his role in the scheme. And I think efficiency has been really good, like Kory mentioned, not having spacing, not having other good offensive threats. But I'd probably lean towards him accepting his player option just because I want to say it's for around 17 mil. And just given there's not a ton of like contending teams, he'd almost be better off staying on the Magic and asking for a trade or even possibly getting an extension and then being traded because there are a lot of roles where he could, have a great impact on a playoff team, be it off the bench, be it starting, whatever it might be. And you don't even need him to close because it's not like he's a guy that's making a ton of money. He just adds some offense to your squad when you don't have it. So one of these defensive teams, I wouldn't be surprised if they make a move for him at the deadline to just kind of give him that extra boost. And he can score at all 3 levels. Like, obviously, inside, he's not going to throw down dunks. He has a nice little layup package. Not amazing, but something there. Mid-range game, 3-point game, a little playmaking. So Fournier's got some good offensive skills.
No doubt. And I think the most impressive thing is that Kory said his name somewhat correctly. Fournier. I think it's Fournier. I mean, I'm generally the pronunciation expert here.
Fournier shot 69% within 3 feet of the basket this year. Just
That's
so you
impressive.
guys know, for some added context. So 69% around the rim, 47% from 3 to 10 feet, 38% from 10 to 16. So the long two is not so good, but then pretty good from 3. So actually, that's pretty damn impressive that he can score pretty much from everywhere except for the long twos.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with him. Like I said, I expect him to accept that player option, but teams will probably be hunting him in a trade because Orlando's in a weird situation. I think it's about time they kind of go back to entering that rebuild with the whole Jonathan Isaac injury and try to trade Vucevic or whatever it might be. But we'll save that for another show. Any other thoughts on Fournier before we move on to the top 10?
He shot 53% from corner threes this year.
Wow, that is beautiful. That's a very intriguing number. But on that note, we'll move to number 10.